It's been called the day that stole America's innocence. This is the conspiracy that caused many people to believe in conspiracies. Follow me down the rabbit hole about JFK. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today and next week we were talking about JFK. There's just no way this is going to be a one-parter. It's two parts for sure. Today we're going to do all of the history about JFK and Lee Harvey Oswald, and then next week we're going to go into all the conspiracies because there's just so much about JFK. But I have some news to share and some things to get out of the way before we can even get into JFK. So, first things first, it's been a long week since I talked to you all last. I had a baby in that time frame, and we got JFK just rocking and rolling. I promised you guys JFK, so I wasn't going to back down from that. But I just needed to take a little break in the middle of the week to have a baby and then come back and do this for you. Also, happy Thanksgiving. I know this comes out before Thanksgiving. If you are listening to this, I have a Black Friday sale for you. So if you use the promo code BLACK23 when you check out through my Shopify, you get 15% off. It lasts for like a week. So go check it out. Starts today and then goes through next week. So enjoy that little Black Friday, Cyber Monday, whatever sale. Anyway, let's just jump into it. So like I said, we are going over the history today. There was so much that I realized this is going to be its own episode like we did for one of the other episodes. And then next week we'll talk all about the conspiracies of JFK. If you are listening to this on release day, so if this is Wednesday and you are listening to it just came out 60 years ago today, is the day that our president, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated. So that's why it was really important that I got John F. Kennedy, the JFK conspiracies out today, or like the start of it today, because it's the 60th anniversary. So if you're listening to it any other time, it's still been 60 years. So anyway, that's all. They tried to paint like this really pretty picture of what happened, but if you ask me, it's way too coincidental to believe. And I think most of America kind of agreed with that. So that's where all of this kind of started. So John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born May 29th in 1917 in Brookline, Massachusetts. Brookline, Massachusetts? Brooklyn? Sorry, if you're from Massachusetts, let me know how you would say that. He was born to Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, who was a philanthropist and a socialite, and Joseph Patrick Kennedy, a businessman and politician. He was second of 9 children, and he was named after his mother's father, John Francis Fitzgerald, who was the Boston mayor and popularly referred to as Honey Fitz, which I just thought that was kind of fun. He quickly gained the nickname Jack. You know, like when you have your baby and you just look at him and you're like, yeah, this is your name, but we're going to call you Pooh Bear or whatever. His nickname was Jack. So we refer to him as Jack throughout this, or John. Both things are true. Same person. So Jack was not a healthy baby. He suffered from lots of things. He had whooping cough, measles, chickenpox. Just before he was 3, he got scarlet fever. His parents literally thought he was going to die. But after about a month, because he had the scarlet fever and he was in the hospital, he took a turn and he recovered. Thank God. But he was just never really a healthy kid. Both of Jack's grandfathers, so on both sides, were politicians, and all of his grandparents were Irish immigrants. So they were Irish Catholic, and at the time, it was hard to kind of fit in as Irish Catholics in Boston, so they didn't really try. Joseph Kennedy was bound to make $1 million by the time he was 35, so Daddy Kennedy. And he did quite well for himself. He made a lot of money for his family. And he actually established trust funds for all 9 of his children. But he was also away a lot on business, and like that didn't stop him from having quite the influence over his children's lives. So he was gone often because he had things to do. He was providing for his family. Mom was at home taking care of 9 kids, and dad would come home, and when he was home, he was very present. He encouraged competition among the boys and lots of political discussions. And he also expected a really high level of academic achievement from all the kids. He himself went to Harvard after all, so he expected that the kids would kind of just like follow in his footsteps. And they did what was expected of them, that's for sure. With the outbreak of polio in Massachusetts, Joe Sr. moved his family to New York City in September of 1927. I'll refer to him, Daddy Kennedy, as Joe Sr. throughout the show because the oldest was Joseph Kennedy Jr., and he would later die. So we'll get there. But they would spend their summers, they all moved to New York City, but they spend their summers in their summer house in Hyannis Point, Massachusetts, which is a village of Cape Cod. And again, I'm probably pronouncing that really poorly. And they would also spend Christmas and Easter at their Palm Beach, Florida home. So they're doing very, very well for themselves because all kids have trust funds and they have 3 homes that they spend different time in. So good for them, honestly. So Jack attended a couple different private schools. He did eventually land at the Chalkgate School, something like that. It was a prestigious preparatory boarding school in Connecticut, and his parents wanted him to attend a Catholic school because they are Irish Catholics, but Joe Sr. was worried that it would have a big impact on his children's political careers in the future, and thought that they needed to be with boys from prominent Protestant families. So he was already thinking about their careers and their life, and exactly like he wanted them to be politicians and in the light that way. So he did everything he needed to with them growing up to make sure that that's what happened. While at this school, because his older brother Joe also attended the school, he kind of developed this rebellious side because he didn't want to follow directly in his brother's shadow. And Joe Jr. kind of was like the poster child. He did everything he was supposed to do. He was like the perfect kid. So Jack developed this rebellious side and did all kinds of crazy stuff while he was there. But he also became very sick again. So in 1935 or 34, he was hospitalized, and the doctors they suspected that he had leukemia. He was transferred to Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, where he ended up being diagnosed with colitis, which is much better than leukemia. But while he was there and he was sick, he became a passionate reader because he didn't have a whole lot else to do besides read, hang out. After he got better, he went back to the school and he graduated 64th of 112 students. But he was voted most likely to succeed. And one of his teachers would later say, quote, "Not as steady as his brother Joe, but still showed flashes of brilliance," end quote. So they didn't have like as high of hopes. And I think the whole Kennedy family was kind of like under the same assumption because Joe was like such a, straight edge kind of guy. They expected him to go on and do all the things, and Jack would just he would also do great things, just not be the president until he was the president. In September of 1935, he traveled to London with his parents and his sister Kathleen, and he intended to study at the London School of Economics as his brother did because he just kept following in Joe's footsteps. I think the parents were kind of pushing that anyway. But his poor health sent him home and then kept him in the U.S. So he enrolled in Princeton University but had to leave due to gastrointestinal illness. So then the next September, so September 36, he enrolled at Harvard College. While he was at Harvard, he did play JV football, but he was injured and that forced him off the team. And this injury actually left him with back problems that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Like he would never get over this back issue. So I don't know what happened, But it doesn't help that he already has all these health issues, right? So now he's got back issues too. In July of 1938, Jack sailed overseas with his brother Joe to work at the American Embassy in London. So their father was already serving as FDR's U.S. ambassador to the court of St. James. So the boys went out there to kind of just like follow their dad and learn everything they could about politics. The following year, Jack traveled throughout Europe, the Soviet Union, the Balkans, and the Middle East, and he was preparing for his Harvard thesis because he was going to go back and graduate. However, when he was in Berlin, a U.S. diplomatic representative gave him a secret message about a war that was going to break out, and he was basically supposed to tell his dad so his dad could alert America. And just a day after his return to London, Germany invaded Poland. So it was like perfect timing. He told his dad. I don't know if dad got back to FDR what the situation was, but I know that Jack was the one that was given the message to be like, hey, a war is coming soon. And then it was like the next day. So Jack returned to Harvard, taking his studies much more seriously this time, and he developed an interest in political philosophy. I think that helped because he had just traveled, Europe and the Middle East and all these different places that he was starting to figure out like life. He graduated from Harvard cum laude with the Bachelor of Arts in Government, concentrating on international affairs, which again could be his dad pushing him that way because they all were supposed to go into politics. His grandfathers were both in politics, and his dad was in politics. That's what the Kennedys were supposed to do. And I don't know if you've kept up with them lately, but they're still in politics. Like, that's just what they do. So, the Kennedys were supportive of U.S. involvement in World War II, which resulted in Joe Sr.'s dismissal from, as the ambassador in the UK because America wasn't getting involved. And this actually created quite the split between the Kennedy and the Roosevelt families because the Roosevelts were not trying to get involved and the Kennedys were like, yes, we need to be involved. So anyway, Jack was planning to attend Yale Law School, but America did finally enter the war, so he joined the Navy Reserves instead, which his brother also joined the Navy. He initially wanted to join the Army, but after months of training, he was disqualified due to his chronic lower back problems and probably the fact that he just wasn't a very healthy person. So he joined the Navy because the Navy has lower standards. I'm just kidding. The Navy just has a different job. On September 24th of 1941. And with the help of the director of the Office of Naval Intelligence, who was also a former naval attaché to Joe Sr., he got to join the Navy. So that's probably more likely as to why he joined. The standards thing was not true. Their standards were much higher than they are now. But he wanted to be a PT boat commander, but his health issues seemed to almost completely prevent him from doing that. But his father intervened with misleading medical records. Whatever that means. So they also convinced the PT officer that his presence would bring publicity to the fleet. You'll notice throughout all of this that Joe Sr. gets involved and basically gets whatever he wants every single time. So he has a lot of pull and a lot of money, and he uses it. He uses it to get his children exactly what they need to be done. So Jack was sent to the Panama Canal after his training was complete, but he did not like that because he didn't feel like he was really in the fight. He wanted to go be in the war. So he wrote to the Senator of Massachusetts and was reassigned to the South Pacific, which was right in the war, that's for sure. While under his command, the PT boat that he was in charge of at the time was rammed and cut in half. Literally in half. So he lost 2 crew members, and although Jack's back was hurt again in this wreck, he swam a badly burned crew member to safety. And they ended up going to this little island, and it took him and his crew 7 days to be rescued. And he actually wrote a note on like a coconut to get rescued. It's crazy how it all worked out. But he became a war hero because of that. And then he went back and he became a commander of another PT boat, but he was relieved from command under doctor's orders. Basically, he was hurt, he was sick, he was not doing well. And he spent the majority of the rest of his service just in hospitals trying to get better. And he received an honorable discharge and was discharged due to physical disability on March 1st, 1945. On August 12th of 1944, so I know we're backtracking just a little bit, Joe Jr., who is Jack's older brother, was killed on an air mission. He was a naval pilot, but his body was never recovered. And Jack actually got really mad about this because he thought that Joe was trying to like follow in his footsteps because Jack had been in this PT boat crash. He was like, oh, he was just trying to like one up me with this air mission, and then he died. So I don't know. The Kennedys are very weird about their deaths. But like I said, Joe Jr. was supposed to be the son that followed his father into the politics and eventually would become the president, and that was always the plan. But with his death, that just fell on the next son, which was Jack. And because of the pull Joe Sr. had, he was getting Jack to Washington. 100%. Like, that was happening. So he urged the representative from the 11th Congressional District of Massachusetts to vacate his seat, and he did. The rep was just like, all right, cool, deal. In return for vacating his seat, he would become the mayor of Boston, so that worked out for him. But this allowed Jack to eventually run for the House of Representatives. First, he had to run for the Congressional District, and he won his district by beating 9 other candidates and winning 42% of the vote, which compared to, like, that's 10 people. That's a lot of the vote. And in 1946, he won the House elections, beating the Republican candidate by taking 73% of the vote. So he was very popular, very popular. Jack served in the House for 6 years, and he started preparing to serve in the U.S. Senate as early as 1949. So he was like, cool, I'm here. I'm not stopping here. I'm just going to keep going until I get what I want. But also his dad, I'm sure, was pushing him because his dad funded all of his campaigns monetarily. His whole family was behind every single campaign. So I'm sure dad was like, this is your path. This is what you're doing. And he just followed what his dad said. I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but I think it was like known in the Kennedy family, like this is the path. So when he started getting prepared for his Senate race, he once again would be funded by his dad. And his younger brother, Robert, actually served as his campaign manager for the first time. Even the females in the family were really dedicated to this campaign for Senate. They started hosting teas and like at hotels and different places and inviting women voters out because women, like, they could vote, but they didn't really. They were canvassing, so they were going like house to house trying to convince the women voters to come out and vote. And it worked. So although the Republican presidential candidate, Dwight D. Eisenhower, was carrying Massachusetts, Kennedy won the seat like for Senate by 70,000 votes. So he won. He won his Senate race. And the next year he married Jacqueline Bouvier. Bouvier. She became Jackie Kennedy. So over the next 2 years, he was often absent from the Senate because he was undergoing spinal operations. And at the time, he was critically ill, which is the story of his life. He even received Catholic last rites, so they really thought he was going to die. But he didn't. He just kept on hanging on. He served in the Senate until 1960. However, he had ambitions, right? So while he was serving, he became quite known for his responsiveness to his constituents. So people really liked him. And he was just like a very charismatic guy. People were super into him. And he was handsome. He's got this beautiful wife. People liked him, That's all you need to win a Senate race and then a presidency. So after his 1958 Senate win, he started to focus on his run for presidency. So during this time as a senator, Lyndon Johnson viewed Kennedy as a playboy and described his performance in the Senate as pathetic. So Lyndon Johnson really didn't much care for Kennedy at all. He didn't do anything really noteworthy during his career though, like his Senate career. It seemed as though he was just gearing up for the presidential run. Like he was just going through the motions until he could be the president. On January 2nd of 1960, Kennedy announced his candidacy for the Democratic presidential nomination. Because of his age, some people questioned his age, his experience, but he had this eloquence about him and he was charismatic, so that carried him, You don't need a lot, apparently, in the 1960s. He had kind of a hard time because many Americans held anti-Catholic attitudes, but he quickly kind of kiboshed that because he was very vocal about the separation between church and state. So that really kind of did away with all the anti-Catholic people. But this also gave him the Catholic voters because they're like, oh, cool, we're going to get a Catholic president. Yet again, Joe Sr. funded his campaign and Robert served as the campaign manager. So, it's a family affair, as always. And then he won the Democratic nomination. He chose Lyndon Johnson as his running partner because he thought that would help him win from the South. But Lyndon Johnson was also in the running for the Democratic nomination. He didn't get it. So he settled to be the running mate for Kennedy after he didn't get the presidential nomination. Kennedy defeated Nixon in the presidential election by just 0.2%. This was crazy. I looked this up. This was insane. So Kennedy won 49.7% to 49.5%. That was a close race. So yes, people liked him, but man, they did not like him that much. I mean, wow. That's a close presidential race. Jack was the youngest person to ever be elected to the presidency. So he was 43 when he won his presidency. But the only other president that was younger than him was Theodore Roosevelt at 42. But he succeeded to office after the assassination of William McKinley. So he wasn't elected as the youngest, whereas John F. Kennedy was the youngest elected president. During Kennedy's presidency, we see some things for sure. Right away, we see the Bay of Pigs situation. So Kennedy wanted America's involvement with the operation to be a secret. He was like, yeah, we shouldn't be telling people we're part of this. But it was pretty obvious that the CIA sponsored the whole brigade. And this stands out as one of the major mistakes of Kennedy's presidency. If you don't know about the Bay of Pigs, you weren't paying attention in history class in high school, but you can go look it up. I'm hitting on the bullet points of his presidency. I'm not going to go super in depth. If you want to do more about his history and his presidency, that's totally on you to go do that. On May 4th of 1961 was the first Freedom Ride. So this Freedom Ride exposed the unlawful nature of the enforcement of segregation in the bus travel. This was just the first one. He was very actively against segregation and a very pro civil rights kind of guy. On May 5th, so just the next day, Alan Shepard Jr. became the first American in space. And this prompted Kennedy to commit to putting a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And if you want to know about the moon, I have a whole episode on that. Go check it out. In June of 1961, Kennedy met with the Soviets in Vienna to resolve the conflict over the status of Berlin, but that wasn't successful. So in August, East Germany began constructing a wall between the sections of Berlin. In January of 1962, the Geneva Conference adjourns without reaching an agreement on nuclear test ban, so that was cool. In February of 1962, Kennedy halts all trade with Cuba. And the next month, he announces the reduction of U.S. import duties as part of an agreement to promote international trade. In September of 1962, James Madison desegregates the University of Mississippi. So I have a little bit more information on this because I thought it was really interesting and I hadn't heard anything about it before. So the federal marshals had to escort Meredith, who was an African American student, to class. So Meredith had applied to Ole Miss but was rejected, and he sued the university in federal court and he won. So Meredith graduated from Ole Miss in 1963, and he was actually a really important symbol for the civil rights movement. And Kennedy was very involved in the whole situation because of the federal marshals being involved, the federal court being involved, and he was constantly talking to the governor of Mississippi to make sure that everything was good, that nothing went amiss with this whole situation. Amiss. I didn't mean to do that. Anyway, it all worked out because he graduated. In October of 1962, we saw the Cuban Missile Crisis. In June of 1963, we see a significant civil rights activist assassinated. We also see Kennedy demonstrating his solidarity with West Berlin. So he's got a lot going on all fronts constantly, but I mean, doesn't every president? In August, there was the March on Washington, and this was when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. So Kennedy was in office for that. In October, Kennedy signed a limited nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviet Union and the United Kingdom. So they did eventually get to this test ban for nuclear weapons. It just took a couple years. The last thing we see of Kennedy's presidency is his death. So on November 22nd of 1963, during a trip to Dallas, President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed while traveling in a motorcade. The president and first lady were in Dallas to gain support for the upcoming presidential election. He was kind of going all over the place. Jackie Kennedy had actually lost a child earlier in the year. I mean, not just her, but they had lost a child earlier in the year. So she hadn't been very public, but she knew how important this was to Jack to for her to be there and be seen. So they both went to Dallas, basically just to say hi, I'm going to run for president again. And he got shot and killed. So when they were riding in a car with the top down, as Kennedy insisted that the top be down, that everyone should be able to see him, gunshots rang out and Kennedy was shot in the neck and the head. He was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital and he received Catholic last rites and was pronounced dead at the hospital. The search was on, basically, for Kennedy's assassin. Instantly, they were like, okay, we've got to figure this out. So it was determined that the shots came from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Lee Harvey Oswald worked at the depository and was arrested at a nearby movie theater. Oswald quickly became the most hated person in America because so many people just liked John F. Kennedy, and their president just got shot. But he was never tried for his crime because 2 days after his arrest, Jack Ruby, who was a Dallas businessman and nightclub owner, shot Oswald as he was being transferred to a jail. So that was the end of Kennedy as we knew it. But that is not the end of our story, because now we are going to get into the history of Lee Harvey Oswald. I did not think that we could really get into the conspiracies if you didn't know the background of Lee Harvey Oswald, because it just doesn't there's just too much that goes into it for you to not know the history of John F. Kennedy, but also the history of Lee Harvey Oswald. So here we go. On October 18th, 1939, in New Orleans, Louisiana, Lee Harvey Oswald was born to Robert Edward Lee Oswald Sr. and Marguerite Frances Claverie. So Robert Oswald was a third cousin of President Theodore Roosevelt and a distant cousin of General Robert E. Lee. I don't know why I included that. I thought it was interesting. However, just 2 months before Lee Harvey Oswald was born, Robert died of a heart attack. So he never knew his father. Obviously, he has a brother, that's Robert Jr., and then there's another half-brother, that's John. In 1944, the family moved to Dallas. So they moved from New Orleans to Dallas. And as a child, Oswald was described as withdrawn and temperamental. He and his mother would move to New York when he was 12 and live with his half brother John. And Oswald and his mother were asked to actually leave John's house after an argument between Oswald and his mother. And Oswald threatened to cut John's wife with a pocket knife. So between the argument and the threatening John's wife, John was like, "You gotta go, kid. Get out of here." But they stayed in New York for a little bit longer. They just had to leave John's house. So Oswald attended school in the Bronx, but he had truancy issues, which landed him in a psychiatric assessment, which I don't know how one has to do with the other, but he went to the juvenile hall and went to a psychiatric assessment because of his truancy issues. Oswald's behavioral issues actually continued after that when he went back to school, and the school sought to remove him from his mother's custody to be placed in a home for boys because they thought that basically like he wasn't getting better and mom wasn't helping. But that never happened because first of all his behavior drastically improved all of a sudden, and then him and his mother moved back to New Orleans. In 1956, Oswald quit school to join the U.S. Marine Corps when he was just 17. So he had to have approval from a guardian. So Robert Jr., Oswald's older brother, signed off saying like, "Yep, he's good to go. He needs to get away from his crazy mom anyway." So that worked out for him. He went through aircraft control and warning operator school and was stationed at Naval Air Facility Atsugi, which is near Tokyo in Japan. As with all Marines, of course, he was trained and tested in shooting, so he knew how to use a gun. But he was court-martialed after he accidentally shot himself in the elbow with an unauthorized .22 handgun. And like he wasn't like that great of a shot anyway. Like he wasn't he got a sharpshooter ribbon, but then he actually did worse the next time he tested. So he actually just got a marksmanship weapon or ribbon. He wasn't that great, is what it really comes down to. He was then court-martialed a second time for fighting with the sergeant he thought was responsible for his punishment for the shooting thing. And this caused him to be reduced in rank and briefly imprisoned. He had a third incident where I don't know if he was court-martialed for this third incident or what, but he basically was on duty in the Philippines and was just like randomly was shooting his gun into the jungle, like for funsies. So that was his third incident. It was not great. His time in the Marines was not ideal. But while he was in the Marines, he started to show some like pro-Soviet sentiments, which this is like right in the middle of the Cold War. So I feel like this is not the time for you to be like, yeah, I really like Russia. But he did start to teach himself Russian, and this actually got him invited to take the Marine Proficiency exam in written and spoken Russian. He scored poorly on this exam, though. So it wasn't like he was doing a great job. He was just like barely getting by. So dude's not like incredibly smart, and he's not incredibly good at anything, which I think is really important to note when we're talking about him masterminding the death of a president. Anyway, I'm not getting the conspiracy yet. This is just the history. In 1959, he received a hardship discharge claiming his mother needed care, so they put him into the Marine Reserves instead. And basically just after his discharge, because he had saved up money while he was in the Marines, he traveled to the Soviet Union. As soon as he landed, he had this guide, and he told this guide, "Hey, I want to become a Soviet citizen." He was heavily questioned by Soviet officials about this. They're like, "Why? Like, what the heck? Most people don't like leave America, come here and want to be Soviet citizens." And I could see them thinking like, "Oh, this guy's a double agent, right?" So they're trying to do their due diligence. He basically just said that he was a communist and he likes the Soviet Union. So the day his visa was due to expire, he was told that his citizenship application was denied. They weren't going to accept him. So He did what any rational person would do, and he inflicted a minor but very, very bloody wound to his wrist because he was upset. And his guide was coming to get him. He knew his guide was going to come get him to take him to the airport to escort him out of the country. So he knew that he needed to do something. So he cut himself, and his guide found him, and he was sent to the hospital and put under psychiatric evaluation for a week. All the while, he insisted that he wanted to be a Soviet national. And he went to the embassy in Moscow. He denounced his U.S. citizenship, and basically the story of the defection of the former U.S. Marine made headlines. Like, people knew about this guy because of this stunt. So now he's in the headlines for doing something stupid because he's dumb. While he was there, he went to work at an electronics factory in Belarus, and this is where he met Ella German, who was a coworker, and they entered into a relationship. But he was seeing other women, so when he proposed to her, she was like, "No way, man. You've been sleeping around. I'm not doing it." In January of 1961, he started to question his decision to stay in the Soviet Union. Basically, like, the pay wasn't very good, the accommodations weren't very good. There wasn't anything to do with his pay, so he couldn't go out to like a bowling alley, or there was no recreation. He was just like in the Soviet Union. Welcome to communism, bro. I don't know what you expected. So he wrote to the embassy and asked for his American passport back. He was like, I want to go home now, thanks. In March, so just 2 months later, he met Marina Prusakova, and 6 weeks later, he married her. And their daughter was born in February of 1962. In May of 1962, he wrote to the embassy again and asked for the documents to allow Marina and their daughter to come back to the U.S. with him. And he got a loan, and the family left for the United States. They're like, all right, cool. Yeah, no problem. Not only did you denounce your citizenship and leave the U.S., now you've married a Soviet local, had a baby with her, and you're going to bring both of them back. That's not weird at all. It's totally fine. The Oswalds settled in Dallas because that's where Lee's mother and brother lived at the time. Lee started work on a manuscript right when he got back about life in the Soviet Union, but he quickly gave up on that. But I think some people point to that, be like, oh, he had a manuscript. Yeah, he was lazy though, so he didn't actually finish it. The Oswalds became involved with anti-communist Russian and Eastern Europeans in the area, so they were kind of denouncing communism as well. In March of 1963, Oswald used an alias to order a secondhand rifle. He actually got 2 different weapons. I was surprised. They were like $30 and you could just order them in the mail. But times were different then. However, here's something that's really strange. So on April 10th, allegedly, Oswald attempted to kill retired U.S. Major General Edwin Walker. The United States House Select Committee on Assassinations stated that the, quote, evidence strongly suggested that Oswald carried out the shooting. So General Walker was outspoken. He was a very outspoken anti-communist, segregationist, and a member of the John Birch Society. But before Kennedy's assassination, there were no suspects in Walker's attempted assassination. But as soon as they suspected Oswald in Kennedy's assassination, now they suspected him in Walker's attempted assassination. Walker didn't die. He was kind of injured a little bit, but he lives still. I think the thing is, I can't find the connection. How did Oswald know about General Walker? What was the connection there? Why would he want to kill him? Just because he was an outspoken anti-communist? But, most of America was anti-communist because of the Cold War. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And after the suspected Walker attempted assassination, Oswald traveled to New Orleans, Mexico, and then he eventually came back to Dallas. But I don't know, things aren't adding up. I think they just kind of put it on Oswald because he apparently, allegedly killed Kennedy. So they're yeah, he must have also attempted to assassinate General Walker. I don't know. Things aren't adding up. So after Lee went to New Orleans and then to Mexico and then came back to Dallas, he started working at the Texas School Book Depository. And this was October 16th. So just a month before Kennedy's assassination. And he was described as an above average employee, although that is not how he was described at most of his jobs. This job, he was doing great. He was doing a really good job. Just a month before Kennedy's assassination, so 4 days after he gets this job, his second daughter is born. So now he's got 2 daughters at home, brand new baby. He's got this new job. He's doing great at it. And he's about to go kill the president. Just some things just aren't adding up. But he was on the FBI's list. The FBI became interested in Oswald after an agent learned that the CIA had determined Oswald had been in contact with the Soviet embassy in Mexico. I'm not sure if that's true, if he actually had been in contact with the Soviet embassy, but apparently the CIA was watching him. And they were they were suspecting him of espionage before Kennedy ever even arrived in Dallas. Oswald, so the FBI had gone to Oswald's house a couple of times when he was not home. Just his wife was there and the newborn baby. And so Oswald went to the FBI headquarters and left a note stating that if they wanted to learn anything about him, they should come talk to him directly. However, some accounts vary on this. Some say that he threatened to blow up the FBI headquarters. That's not founded. We don't know for sure if he actually threatened to blow him up. It's just stated that he was if you want to know about me, come talk to me about it and I'll tell you. Stop bothering my wife. Basically, leave my wife out of this. Days before Kennedy arrived in Dallas, his motorcade route was published in many local newspapers. So literally anybody had access to the route that he was going to be taking that morning. So, but there are some sketchy things. So don't I'm not trying to say that Oswald didn't do it or did do it. I don't know what I think yet. But Oswald had to get rides to and from work because he didn't drive. So the morning of the assassination, he had brought this long paper bag with him to the carpool. He told the guy that was driving him that it was just curtain rods, which it totally could have been curtain rods. Who knows, right? That paper bag was found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. And that's the floor where the shots were supposedly shot from. Well, Oswald has kind of been seen all over. Somebody put him on the 6th floor an hour before the assassination, and then when it was well, we didn't see him at all after that. Well, that's not true. Other people saw him. He was kind of all over the place. He was supposed to be eating lunch at one point. There's 2 lunchrooms in the depository. One's on the 1st floor, one's on the 2nd floor. He wasn't seen in either of the lunchrooms during lunchtime. However, about 90 seconds after the shot sounded, Oswald entered the lunchroom on the 2nd floor. His supervisor was there, so he noticed him. And he noted that Oswald was not out of breath and did not look nervous. So I don't know what that points to. I'm just giving you the information, right? He would have been out of breath had he been on the 6th floor. Basically, it's assumed that he was on the 6th floor, boom, 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 3 shots fired, and then he quickly hid his rifle under some boxes and ran down the stairs and then entered the lunchroom. But if you're going to do all those things, first of all, you would look nervous or scared or something. You would have some sort of emotion. Secondly, you would be out of breath because you just ran down 4 flights of stairs. So that just seems a little weird. He was told the president was shot, and then Oswald left the building. Basically, everyone was told, oh, President Kennedy was just shot outside. And then Oswald left the building, and he was actually the only person that was not accounted for when the police shut the building down. So, but again, the president just was shot. I don't know, I don't know what's going through your head. Later, he was allegedly confronted by Dallas patrolman J.D. Tippett because the description that had gone out was of Oswald. So I don't know. Again, I'm saying allegedly because he was never actually tried for any of these crimes. So we don't know if he actually killed Tippit or actually killed Kennedy or what. But apparently, Tippit confronted Oswald, and Oswald shot him 4 times and then fled the scene. There are 9 witnesses to Oswald fleeing the scene, and they say that he was carrying a revolver. The bullets taken from Tippit's body could not be positively identified as having been fired from Oswald's revolver because apparently they were like really damaged. So I don't know. But basically after that, a local shoe store manager saw Oswald like ducking in the entrance of the alcove of his store and like acting kind of shady. So he like just watched him, which at first I was like, what the heck? Like, why are you just watching this guy? But then I remembered, like, okay, president's just been killed. Like, I'm sure all of Dallas is on high alert looking for some like weird, suspicious looking dude, right? And Oswald is like fitting this mold perfectly. So Oswald apparently seemed suspicious to the shoe store manager. So he watched him go into like the local movie theater and then told the theater ticket guy, like, call the police. The guy is here. The police came. There's kind of like a little back and forth, and they took Oswald into custody. 2 days later, on November 24th, Jack Ruby shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald. So Oswald never got a chance to be tried or anything. I mean, he was dead. Basically, in the court of public opinion, he was guilty, and that was the end of it. So that's where we're going to stop for today. I knew it was going to be a lot of history, but I think it was really important that we cover the history of both John F. Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald because some things just aren't adding up. So until next week, my friends, I hope you guys have a lovely holiday if you're celebrating. Enjoy that. Take advantage of the Black Friday sale. Again, the code is Black23 if you want to go use that. And I'll see you all next week with another episode of JFK Part 2. Until then, stay skeptical, and I will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.